No, I'm glad that it reads that way. I mean, there was a lot of tenderness put into it, I think. It's a portrait of my friend. And I think when I was posing them, when I was like trying to set up the composition, I was thinking a lot about like how um, gender has been like portrayed in the past. And they're, gender non-conforming. Um, and so I was not necessarily thinking about like breaking gender roles in such like, um, direct terms, but was just trying to picture them as like how I see them. Um, and they have, I don't know, like a very um, sort of caring and thoughtful nature about them. And so that is like a lot of what um, I think came through, or what I hope came through. Um, so yeah, that's a lot of why what went into that painting. I wasn't thinking so directly about I guess like how do you see them in relationship to the park that surrounds them, but they are giving this like look at this flower and they're holding it in a way that's like so gentle. um and I think like historically you see this connection between like women and nature, like women being painted in nature, as a way to like show their femininity, show like something I guess that's like innate. Um, and in I guess in a way I was trying to expand that depiction of gender to encompass my friend who is queer. Yeah, and depicting that queerness in that way. Boat Party started in an interesting place. It was the first of a long series of party paintings that I've been working on. But it really just started by looking at boats, right? Like I was interested in, um, the early 20th century like steamboat and the aesthetics of it. Specifically the ones that like, you know, go along the river, and like are able to host these types of events, are able to host a party. So I was interested in the aesthetic of that. And I was like imagining sort of this grand party that's like happening on it. And I guess the debauchery that ensues. And I think a lot of like what I am doing through my party paintings, in a lot of my work, is like building like a fictional world that I want to live in, you know? And so building this world and like that that piece is also explicitly queer. Like how I imagine it, like the focus of the party is is a queer person and is like able to show that really freely. Um, and so it did start with like the boat. I think I think a lot about spaces in my work, and I then move on to like think about, well, what inhabits this space, you know? Um, yeah, I think it's a part of it. It's definitely a part of how I'm thinking about these paintings. So with like Boas in the park and with the water tower, I was posing people. Um, and for the water tower painting, I was posing people who are best friends. And they're very comfortable around each other. And that proved to be like so helpful when I was actually painting. Because I don't know, I could sort of translate that love that they have for each other. And I do hope that comes through. With the boat party, I feel like it's such a unique relationship because it's this person who's almost on a stage, right? She's like um, being witnessed in a way. And so she has a unique look, but it's not necessarily in relationship to the people that are around her. So how, I start work is, when I'm thinking about either a space, I'll do studies of that space. I'll do studies of how I want people to fit into that space. And then I might pose people in real life, right? I might have a model and take photos to try to get a better sense of like, how would this person fit here? Like, how would that look natural? And so I'm doing a lot of studies. I'm doing sketches of the space, sketches of the people, and also using photography before starting on the actual canvas. Yeah, so Water Tower was inspired, it's a painting of a party, but it was inspired by these spaces that are all around New York. So you'll have, more upscale apartment buildings try to hide their water towers, and they hide them with these like large structures on the top of their buildings. And oftentimes they'll have like, giant grand windows. Um, and you would never know that there's a water tower inside of it, other than, maybe studying it, looking at the shape of that structure. But I was trying to envision, like, well, what if there was actually something interesting happening inside of there? Like, what if it wasn't just like a water tower or something to cover up a water tower? And so I did imagine a party that was happening inside there. Um, in the painting, we see two people who are looking at each other, one who's sitting on a couch, one who's sitting, I guess, under the couch. Um, and they are like very much gazing at each other. And there's some other things happening in the background. There's a bar, there's a bartender, but there's not much else. And so I call these things parties, but they're very quiet. They're, not so raucous, but they're kind of gentle. And a lot of what I'm thinking about is like, relationships and the relationships that I have in my life, and those that I see around me. Um, and so like that's a lot of what the focus is. Um, yeah, and the environment for that space was unique, right? We have this giant red lamp, um, and yeah, the inspiration for those spaces, I don't know where it comes from. I guess, that's the part where like my imagination kicks in. And I'm of course inspired by like, you know, 20th century, early 20th century interiors. I love Art Nouveau. Um, but yeah, a lot of that just comes from my imagination. The red lamp, I think, creates a really interesting mood for that piece. I mean, it's so like bright. It's kind of the most saturated part of the painting, um, but I think it frames the figures really well. I think it's quiet. I There's something even a little bit solemn about it, which is interesting for my series of party paintings. There's always something a little bit a little bit solemn, um, but yeah, I think there's like a lot of gentility throughout my work, and how I portray people and their relationship to each other. So as I said to you, like a lot of my painting is creating this fictional world, and they all sort of connect to one world. It's one universe, is how I think of it. And a lot of that is like inspired by what I desire and like what I want in the world that I'm building around me in real life. And so there's like a lot of queer companionship, right? It's like a very free um, space for expression of queer identities and of trans identities in particular. Um, but then there's also the space element, right? I grew up in the city. I grew up in a neighborhood that's like very dense and very packed. And so always trying to find like free space to exist in. And so, um, I envision this city, and it is still a city that has, wide open space for people to enjoy. So, yeah, like just what I've needed as a person, both in terms of the space and the queer companionship I'm building in this fictional world.